During the moderators conference in November of last year, um, there was a breakout session that was hosted by Jihyun Oh from the Office of the General Assembly with some panelists that I found very interesting, and I hope you will as well. So we are going to start our pre-Presbytery event. I would like to introduce Jihyun and let her take it away and introduce the other panelists, and we're off.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, Presbytery Chicago friends. My name is Jihyun Oh. I currently serve as the director of Mid-Council Ministries, and I'll be serving as the facilitator of a panel of colleagues who I very much respect and enjoy getting to work with. And so it is a joy to be with you and with them this morning. I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves in turn. Why don't we start and go in alphabetical order? David Gambrell.
Good morning. I'm David Gambrell from the Presbyterian Church USA Office of Theology and Worship here in Louisville, Kentucky. It's great to be with you this morning and great to see so many familiar names and faces in our small Presbyterian world.
Thanks. Edwin.
Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. My name is Edwin Gonzalez. I'm Associate for Disaster Response for Presbyterian Disaster Assistance in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm happy and glad to be able to participate in this. We're not here because online worship is a disaster. It's just because I like helping in this area. So.
Thanks. Molly.
Good morning, Chicago. It's lovely to be able to gather and not have to contend with the weather from our various locations. I get to serve in the Office of the General Assembly as Manager for Equity and Representation. It's a joy to be with you.
Thanks. And friends, it is interesting for me that I am coming from my own Presbyterian meeting, which I attended for about 45 minutes before switching over here. And they are also talking about virtual and vital worship. This is a Presbytery of Greater Atlanta. And so this is sort of the moment topic for us. So what I'll do to open this panel time so that we can go ahead and dive in is ask each person to make an opening sort of remark about some initial thoughts about online worship from their particular standpoints. So Edwin, why don't we start with you on this one?
Thank you. I was thinking about this, and let me tell you a little bit about me. I work with PDA, but I also work in a church here in Louisville, in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm not in Louisville right now. And have been there for 3 years, and I'm working with the youth in that church. But because of what is happening with the pandemic, I started working with behind the scenes or behind the cameras and helping the pastor and the leadership with everything that had to do with streaming. And my relationship with online worship is a love and hate relationship. I love the opportunity to embrace the new challenges. I love the opportunity to do new things with the church and to be able to continue to be church in this new way, in this new ministry. At the same time, I have to tell you, I hate thinking that for the past year, every Sunday, I have been worshiping behind a computer or a monitor or a camera and having that experience that is not what I'm used to or what I have been, has been my reality for all my life. Also, because I'm a Latino, I like hugging people. So not being able to have people next to me has also been a challenge. And I think all of us in some way have this same relationship with online worshiping. We love the opportunity to be able to continue worshiping God and be in a community from our homes, from our computers or our cell phones. But at the same time, I think we all miss and we all are facing new challenges that have to do with online worshiping and how to be a church in this new era.
Thanks, Edwin. Molly, how about you?
Like Edwin, in my home congregation, I'm also being kind of asked to pick up some tech functions, and I would share that feeling of loss of the kind of vital proximity, breathing the same air, which obviously is not possible in this moment, and the additional kind of work it takes to provide that kind of assistance. At the same time, with my equity and inclusion hat on, I recognize that this disruption of our habits in liturgical work has provided new space for persons who had difficulty accessing worship in a traditional building sense, have more opportunities. The fact that the moment might provide that kind of crack of opening does not, in fact, mean that that greater inclusion is happening, though. And so, just like worship in together in physical space, it takes intentionality. And so, I'm curious about how we can grow our lenses and our skill sets to really check in on those kinds of practices and not just carry over what we did in person to an online and think that's sufficient. And kind of how are we checking in on that? Those are the kinds of places of energy and vitality for this new season for me.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Jihyun. I want to emphasize three things: thinking theologically about worship, remembering the body of Christ in worship, and considering the shape of worship and the way that it shapes us. So when I talk about thinking theologically, I mean asking critical questions. How are we glorifying God and proclaiming the gospel? How are we building up the body of Christ, responding to the movement of the Spirit? How are we equipping people for service in Jesus' name? These days, we're often thinking a lot about worship in technical and technological ways, and I'm grateful for my brilliant colleague, Edwin, and all of his skill in that area. But we can't forget to think theologically, which I know Edwin does as well, especially, and Molly too, especially in a time when it feels like everything is an emergency. It's easy for us to neglect that less urgent but very important work of theological reflection. So the second thing, remembering the body, planning and leading worship should be as much as possible a communal activity, drawing on all the different gifts of the Spirit among us. And so we want to be mindful of the diversity of cultures and vocations and experiences, identities of the whole people of God, and help people to worship with energy, intelligence, imagination, and love, or heart, mind, soul, and strength. And as we think about different media, we need to remember how different media may exclude some and include others, or highlight different aspects of our sensory experience. And then the third thing, the shape and the shaping of worship. The shape or the form of worship forms us. And so how we worship can help to reform and transform the church for its mission and ministry, but it can also, as Molly has pointed out, keep us stuck and hold us back, even malform us. And so we need to be careful about those elements and orders of worship, use appropriate patterns and practices for the life of the church in this moment. There'll be plenty more to say about all of this, but hopefully that's something to get us started.
Well, and David, it feels like you've sort of already alluded to the sort of next question in terms of thinking about the sort of obvious connections with mission and ministry and worship. What are some additional thoughts that you might have about how sort of thinking about the vitality of online worship contributes to the mission and ministry of God being done by the church with your particular lens?
Well, I would say that the mission and ministry of the church is to worship and serve God in all that we do. And worship and service, or adoration and action, ought to be considered two sides of the same coin. You can see this in Hebrew, where the word ebed is used for both worship and service. And you can see it in Greek, where the word liturgia, a term for public service, gives us the word liturgy. So in Christian worship, whether it's online, in person, or a combination of the two, we are being shaped and equipped and prepared for this mission and ministry, to love God, love neighbors, and love one another in every part of our lives, every day of our lives, everything we say and do. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to think, as we're doing this morning, seriously and carefully about what we say and do in worship and why.
Thanks.
Jihyun,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yes, please, Edwin.
We have to remember, I think we have to remember that this is not the first time the church has been challenged with new things. I have been doing a Bible study with a church in Puerto Rico online about the last week of Jesus. And we were talking last week about the entering of the temple and throwing the tables down. And we talk about the destruction of the temple in the year 70 and what that cost to the church of that moment, to the Israelites, and the new ways of worshiping and having to worship from home and having to value the relationship in their communities instead of just one place. And I think similar to what David is saying, this new event that we're facing right now calls us to new challenges and calls us to see and to look for new ways of being a community, but also calls us to check on ourselves if we are still maintaining the same sense that church is just to worship God or to go on a Sunday and make a check mark on our calendar and say, oh, we went to church. Oh, I log in and I saw the worship at the same time it was going live, or I did it during the week and I just participated in worship. But what about the service? What about the mission of the church? And that, I think, is one of the challenges in this world of technology, cameras and audio and visual that we are also facing. How do we continue the mission of the church and not rely that church is just a Sunday on Facebook or on our Zoom or on any other platform that we use?
Thanks, Edwin. Yeah, that's a real challenge when we're asking folks really to, in some ways, right, in order to stay safe and healthy and to stop the effects of the pandemic, to really stay sequestered in bubbles and to stay in homes. How do we actually extend that worship into the lives and actions as we choose to serve the world? Thanks for that point. Molly, how about you? Mission and ministry of God done by the church, and how inclusion and equity is contributing in terms of thinking about worship.
Well, I mean, David has already highlighted kind of our reformed understanding of it's not just a because we're good people kind of thing, but in fact it is tied to the quality and capacity of our worship imagination, right? Like if liturgy is the work of the people, then people need to be reflected in the work and the kind of sense and that style and substance, etc. We know that we are seen in our in all of our complexities, that we're called in our particularities, and the natural consequence of that kind of being seen utterly and loved utterly in a community of equally seen and loved utterly people is that when we gather, we need to be seen and involved. And this is not a passive reception of a liturgical performance. And some of the screen, being confronted by, a sea of little boxes with individual faces or small pods of people, some of us can feel that as a deep disconnect. So how we prepare for worship, how we plan for it, the theological framing, and literally the testing of each of the movements in liturgy and how it can continue to shape, hold space for, recognize us in ways that we may not, again, there may be ways that we can be seen in a virtual worship space that gathering in a central agreed upon space may not see us as, at that same way. I think of all of the ways in which we tend to scrutinize the backgrounds of the screen visual, and how folks contend with either artificial ones, like you see in my in my case, or you see folks who don't want to share their visuals, right? I think about the inequities of the way where we connect from, and the ways in which we judge how folks live, right? How folks connect, how our impulses for association and judgment may come into whether you're on a phone or an iPad or a laptop, or you have a ring light and you're beautifully lit, right? And all of these kinds of ways in which the hierarchies enter into our kind of ways we perceive. And so how does worship attempt to disrupt those kinds of frames that come with us as we gather? How do we enter into the space to be open to God and one another? How do we remain the horizontal relationships as well as the vertical relationships? All of those things matter, and how we gather, who gathers, those things are critical. And what the community can even access to be in relationship with the divine and one another. And so that would be my first my first reaction.
Thanks, Molly. And even across different media, whether we're actually showing up in person, or that there are a lot of the same challenges because of our humanness in the ways that we actually connect, and sometimes the ways in which we connect in a less than ideal way, and sometimes the ways we connect in really ideal ways, right? Those are sort of repeating challenges there. David, there's a question that actually has come up in the chat from Ken Hockenberry. I'm wondering if you might elaborate on the Hebrew and Greek words for worship and work and their connection to our tradition, and how that might actually, again, sort of connect to the online world of worship.
I'll do my best, and I'd love to hear insights from others as well. But one of the first places where we see the word worship in Hebrew scripture is in Exodus, with the narrative of liberating the people from captivity. God says, let my people go, liberate my people so that they may serve me or worship me in freedom. And so there's this great irony. We are set free from service to serve God in freedom. And so I think it's important to keep both sides of that in mind. Worship as liberating work and worship as service to God. The Greek term that's often used around worship liturgy originally, as I understand it, referred to infrastructure, works for the common good, works of public service. And this came to be applied to the work of the church in worship as the work of the people. And so I hope that we remember that the goal of what we do in worship is, of course, to glorify God, but to also contribute to the common good of the world.
Edwin, any thoughts that you want to add to that?
Well, and maybe connected to that is the word ecclesia. That is connected to worship. To worship, we worship as an ecclesia, as a church. as a group of people, as an assembly. And how can we do that when we are online? And how can we do that when many churches are opted to do streaming online? So you cannot see, you can just see the people who are there in front of the cameras, but you cannot see the rest of the people. And I think that has called us to new challenges and understanding that this is not the only way. And to understand that as a church, we are called to diversity, and to understand that we are not all the same and we're not all equal. I have been participating in many different worship experiences that are not just Facebook. Recently, the Presbyterian QA network was invited, and I was invited to participate in a worship service with our brothers, with our siblings from Cuba. And I asked myself, how are we going to do this? Because I know the challenges that they have technologically. That they don't have the ability to just connect on Zoom or go to Facebook. And we did the worship service via WhatsApp. WhatsApp is one of the apps that many people use in Latin America because it allows them to connect and make calls through the internet. And the amazing thing was that what they did was that everyone stopped chatting on the WhatsApp group, and they started receiving the parts of worship, the different parts of worship through messages of people who recorded themselves with their cell phones and just posted them. And you opened the image and you saw the video and you participated and you were able to see new faces. There was, I think, over 30 people who participated in that worship that I don't know, but were there. And we had that sense of community for a minute, even thought the differences and the challenges that represents. I think with new challenges comes new opportunities. And as a church, we need to, and similar to what Molly was saying, understand that not everyone has the same resources. And that diversity that we have, I think like when I moved to Louisville, one of the things that I know a lot of people do in many places is you start looking for a church. And you start looking for the church that fits to your style, to what you like, where you feel comfortable. In my case, we were working in that church too, so it was different. But the same happens when you go to worship. You have to understand that not everyone is going to understand Facebook. Not everyone is going to understand Zoom. Not everyone is going to have that ability. So I think that diversity and that opportunity to do new things. Maybe your church cannot have worship online on Facebook, but can have a worship by phone and connect many phones at the same time. And that is an opportunity for people who cannot worship online and they don't have the internet, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the knowledge, but they know how to take a phone in their hand and just dial a number. And I know that there are many pastors who are posting their sermons on different platforms that allow people to call and just hear the sermon. In those challenges, in those new opportunities, is a way that we continue to be church in the middle of this. And I think the next question is, what are we going to do next with this? How this expand, how we can reform this, or we continue to be reformed in new sense to continue being a church with whatever comes after this.
Thanks, Edwin. And it just highlights, I think, that our tendency often to find the way that works for us and to try to perfect it and then stay with it because it seems to work. But what I hear you sort of calling us to is to say, the flexibility and the diversity of the sort of technical platforms that we even use for the different sorts of worship services and community building within that worship service, but also glorification of God through the caring for one another and the sort of gathering of the community, that those are really important points to consider. And you raised up WhatsApp and Facebook and Zoom as some of the particular ways that folks are doing, and the phone. Sandy in the chat is also saying that they record the service, pre-record the service, but have a Zoom watch party so that folks are actually then participating together and then having a lifetime of prayer requests. And so others are, and there is this question, right, of how do folks actually, when folks are spending all this time on Zoom, I think as Beth is sort of referring to in the question in the chat here, when folks are doing Zoom all day long, how do you reach out to folks who actually are zoomed out and want to engage in another form. I wonder if you might just add a little bit of your thoughts around that, any additional thoughts that you might have.
I think, and Molly mentioned this when she was talking about having their camera on. I think we have to understand that not the same way that not everyone worships this on a live worship, on a regular worship, worships the same. We have to understand that that's the same situation here on Zoom, and that many people just might opt to have their camera off or just be there and watch it, but not interact with anyone else. And that's okay. That's their way. That's what they desire. One of the things that we have to understand, and I was reading about it, is that with Zoom, you're entering into someone's privacy. You're going into their house. You're seeing things that they have in their house. You're seeing if they're rich or poor, or if they have challenges. You see everything that surrounds them, even the noises around them. So you're being invited into someone's life, and many people do not want that. So as a church, we have to also ask ourselves: are we reaching out to everyone who needs to be reached out? Are we doing our best to not only limit ourselves to what we know, what is easy for us, our comfort zone? Doing a Zoom call is easy, let's do that. Yeah, but what about the other people who cannot connect or do not want to connect? And it's difficult. It's a difficult question because it implies new technology, learning new things. But many of us, in my case, I didn't know most of the things that I know a year after. I didn't know the first time. My first worship was with a cell phone in a tripod and just recording live on Facebook. Now we have PTC cameras and we have new technology, but it has been a learning experience that takes time.
Thanks. Molly, your reflections around these questions.
I just keep being brought back to the original question that gathers this panel, which is, vital worship. And vitality for me is not easy, comfortable, predictable, deeply rutted roads. It's that openness, that flexibility, that improvisation, that willing to respond to what and how what the community's needs are, and how folks need to show up in the space, and really, how offering the compassion for folks who are zoomed out, who it just can't be in the Zoom part and want to watch it on the Facebook rerun, or so many are running margins of barely holding on for a variety of reasons. And as some of us still are keeping worship is only this 1 hour, and it's not recorded, and it's just for who can gather. And we should be prepared for folks finding the community that responds to their needs. If we pick that kind of rigidity, and I also recognize that communities are also holding on with all of them, right? And so each congregation is not all of the church for everyone, right? And so as folks are expanding their repertoire, it may be that folks need individuals may need to step into communities that are meeting them more effectively in this moment. And it may not be a geographic boundary or a language. I mean, again, I want to highlight, it's good that you're trying out interpretation in real time for this meeting. That is an incredibly important opening to accessibility. And even if done imperfectly, it's an indicator of interest, concern, connection. And part of me wants would love for those of us who are fluent in other languages to start presenting even in this panel in those languages, just to give us all a sense of the mediation that happens when interpreting kind of engages. At the same time, closed captioning is super important. Not everyone, audio quality is highly variable. You do not have to be hearing impaired to have difficulty following the human voice mediated through internet connections and phone lines. And so closed captioning provides that extra support for folks to check. Did I hear that word? Am I following what my sister or my brother or my non-binary sibling in Christ is providing to this worshiping community? And every step where we accommodate a wider, more open praxis, right? As we think through pronouns, as we think through habits of liturgical speech, as we consider, people will gather from north and south and east and west, but people can gather across continents now for worship. It is not necessarily the community. I know, I am kind of gobsmacked at the reach of an individual congregation anymore, of seeing mission coworkers from, other continents zooming in to the congregation that they connect with. I mean, that is incredible opportunity, right? And so that vital worship keeps me in that space of, our foundational commitments to openness, our foundational commitments to what is worship, and a reminder that discomfort is a signal for me that there's more space than just for me. And so how do I foster being friendlier to discomfort so that I can be challenged or touched in ways that I am not, I often don't allow, right? And so all these sensitivities to one another's kind of individual needs, but this also the community being shifted with each new addition, that the whole community is changed. It's not individuals visiting this static group of people, but the group of people is in fact a new thing. Every time a new ding on the screen of a new person pops in, because the Spirit has that many more folks to work with.
Thanks, Molly. And what I love about what you're saying, right, is sort of a reminder that vitality suggests life and sort of an organic nature of things. And that's not clean, right? It's not perfect. It's actually quite messy often. And so there's I think a reminder that the way we learn, and as the Spirit moves, how we learn alongside where God is moving, maybe a lot of these sort of experimenting with and asking questions and sort of engaging in our discomfort and seeing where the Spirit is leading, sometimes out of our comfort zones into places where we're really, really uncomfortable because we're called to serve God and to love one another. So the other piece that I think we're all sort of recognizing is that there is sort of this hybrid future that is probably coming to us because we have been now in this sort of online work for long enough that we won't ever really be able to fully go back with to just what we were doing before this time. We've sort of habituated in some ways and have seen some of those changes come about. And so, Molly, I wonder if you would talk a little bit about some of your thoughts around the future as sort of thinking about sort of hybrid spaces and what that might mean?
So one of the things in the congregation that I worship in, one of the things that we've noticed is going to Zoom for Sunday. We have Sunday school hours as well as worship. And pre-COVID, children's Sunday school in this congregation would vary in kind of attendance from anywhere from like 6 to 15 children. It's a small 200-member church. 6 to 15 in children's Sunday school, a particular age group. Since COVID, they are having 30 plus kids every Sunday in Zoom Sunday school. And part of that is just the barriers for parents trying to kind of organize children for being ready, is just removed. So it's easier for families, and they're grateful to the church for having the opportunity to have other adults engage their children in spiritual conversations and Bible and etc. for an hour. And that congregation has already said, regardless of whether, when we go back to the building, we must retain this vital and engaged and expanding kind of connection to our families, because there's always, there's families, divorced families, kids going parent to parent, etc. There's just a lot of those kinds of things. And so I think hybrid, the congregation's already kind of said, hybrid is definitely something we're going to do, because we've seen vitality and energy in the kind of learning and spiritual formation space. And all of our habits and all of our expectations, right, that we cue off of our environment will be kicking in. Ask any teacher who is trying to manage in-person classroom and a virtual, non-traditional instruction at the same time. And that is we think it's difficult now. That is an order of magnitude different to, because our attention, we, as much as we'd like to be folks who can multitask, the brain literally doesn't do that, right? You may microtask where your attention is zooming among multiple things. But the consequences for a congregation that is going to do the hybrid thing, or really any worship thing, right, is that you've got to have people intentionally attending to these, right? There are musicians who attend to church music and hold space for a variety of expressions, but they do that. There are Christian educators that hold space for kind of educational teaching. We have pastors that specialize in pastoral care, or pastors who are, who focus on preaching for that Sunday, or liturgical readers, etc. Just like we do that, we're going to need to have folks who step into holding that space for that hybridity. It may be that, worship spaces need to adjust. It may be the way we communicate, who's here. How do we kind of get back into our tunnel about, we look at the room and we only see 16 people here, and we forget there's 45 online or by phone, or right? And so think of this as an incubator for growing the skills for that hybridity. The hybridity is here to stay for work, for school, for worship, for mission and ministry. And that may be an incredible advantage, because folks for whom the physical presence was, in order to be in this community, you needed to be here. there are, you know, folks in nursing home situations, folks in with different abilities and different capacities to be away from home, be with people, etc. It's going to require us enormous creativity, enormous grace, and enormous democratizing of the leadership. It can't just be whoever's the professional leader in a community that can engage effectively the hybridity that is to come. And so we would lean into those ordination vows of elders and deacons and, you know, what does it mean to be a spiritual leader in this community, and how can you bring your full self into caring for all of the different planets and planes of the community gathered. You know, who's going to do WhatsApp? How are we going to kind of do that kind of thing? I think, you know, different generations have different skill sets, and many congregations are learning that this time is already making it clear that there is tremendous wisdom within the congregation and people, and the sheer just confusion of this time is helping people reach out and ask for help when that was not a natural tendency. And so again, lots and lots of grace, lots and lots of space for experiments, letting go of perfection or the need to be right, or the real, you know, the book of the worship, directory for worship that David was very instrumental in, it's very clear about there is not a way. There are many, many, many ways. A book of order, the confessions, in all ways, our expression of our theological understanding, the Bible itself is very clear that there are many, many, many ways to encounter the Holy One, the one who loves us most. And so holding that as a focus and letting go of some of the rigidity of the details is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Molly. And it's also a good reminder, I think, that really there are some people who are already experimenting with hybridity and leading the way on that. And so when the church is sort of dealing with that there are folks who will have some additional wisdom for things that they have tried, and the wisdom for what works and doesn't. David.
Yeah, I just want to add an amen to a couple of things that Molly has just said. One, we are the Presbyterian Church. We're the denomination that doesn't believe in a distinction between clergy and laity. We believe in the priesthood of all believers and the spiritual gifts and leaderships of deacons and ruling elders, as well as musicians and Christian educators and youth workers and all kinds of others. And so this is the time to draw on that tradition and that great strength of our denomination. It's no wonder that leaders are exhausted right now. But out of that exhaustion, we need to remember the strength of our tradition, that we are in ministry together as the whole body of Christ and not lone rangers. The other point that Molly made that I want to emphasize or add an amen to is the multiplicity of forms. When we talk about the future of hybrid worship, there's not one hybrid worship. There are going to be as many different kinds of hybrid worship as there are congregations. And I'm looking through the comments and questions, and there's so many great ideas in there. You all will be your own best resources as you work out contextually what it means to do this work, to do this worship together in your particular context, and in your time and place. As we think about those different formats and different ways of putting together what hybrid worship is going to be, I think it might be helpful for us to think critically about the strengths and weaknesses of certain models and the advantages and disadvantages of certain platforms. So just to take 3 examples, you think about pre-recorded services that people are doing, such as YouTube videos. You get advantages, excellent, beautiful, well-prepared preaching and music and worship with high production values and the convenience of watching it anytime you want. Disadvantages, it's a lot of work. It's very time consuming. It requires great technical expertise, and you can't be as spontaneous. You can't respond to what's going on if you recorded the service earlier in the week, and you're not building community in real time. The second would be streaming on social media, such as Facebook Live. That's what my congregation, Highland Pres here in Louisville, does. Advantages, you're showing a live event. There's not this emphasis on perfection. You can be a little more responsive. You are bringing people together in real time. And there are also opportunities for outreach and evangelism on social networks. But the disadvantages, you're on a social network. And there are all the dangers and distractions that come with that. The advertising, the finicky algorithms, the rude comments, and short attention spans. And so then another model, and next time I do this, I'm going to talk to Edwin about WhatsApp. But another model would be video conferences, like what we're doing now, Zoom meetings. Advantages, it's, I think, a little easier to build authentic community in real time where we can see each other face to face and you can respond to questions and events as they happen. But a disadvantage, as somebody has noted in the comment, is that these tend to be closed communities. Sometimes they require a password or an invitation or at least careful monitoring, and so they may be more daunting for potential visitors. So as you put together your hybrid, think about those strengths and weaknesses, those advantages and disadvantages of the various pieces you're putting together, and add to that postcard ministry and phone calls, drive-in worship, porch visits, driveway visits, all those different permutations. And ask, what are the gifts of our community? What are our strengths? What are our challenges and weaknesses? And how can we use what we've been given to be the church that God's calling us to be?
Thanks, David. Well, and it seems also just sort of based on a comment that I think Joy was sharing here in the comments that hybridity could also mean thinking of worship beyond Sunday morning, right? And that there is this, there are some multiple opportunities to do that, and that there are communities that have been doing that for a really long time, right? In terms of gathering on Wednesdays or Fridays, or a gathering in the mornings, most days of the week. There are apps like the daily prayer, the Book of Common Worship sort of daily prayer app, and those sorts of things that actually could also then sort of encourage worship in different ways. And so there's other ways of thinking about a hybridity, not just on Sunday mornings or for Sunday mornings, but sort of beyond that. Edwin, your thoughts about this emerging word of hybridity?
Well, I was going to mention, similar to what David was saying, in my case, I have learned to embrace the chaos. There's not a perfect way. And this is not one size fits all way of worshiping. And we have a sound person in my church who the other day mentioned that he has learned so much about me behind the cameras, and he says that I have OCD, I am a perfectionist. And I say, well, with things about where the table goes and how to move it so the camera looks good, yeah, I do it because that's the thing I can control. I cannot control the internet. If the internet goes, that's it. We lost the connection. We record it and we wait until it come back to post it online. There's so many things that can go wrong, but there's so many things that are good from it, and you're enjoying it, people are experiencing. I think for churches, it has become a challenge because similar to many other things, we like to compete with each other. We like to, this church is doing this, so how can I do that? Well, maybe you don't have the capacity. Maybe you don't have the amount of people who can do it. Maybe you don't have the technology to do it. So you have to embrace what you have and understand that those tools that you have been giving and in the gifts that you have are the ones that you have to put in work in this moment, and that it doesn't mean that you stop there. You can continue to try to do more things, but embrace what you have in the moment and try to do with what little you have to do the best you can. I know of churches, like I mentioned before, that their worship is through phone because they don't have many of the things that they used to have. In Puerto Rico, I know many churches that are having difficult challenges because many of their members do not have the technology or the internet to do what we do here in the United States, or in even worse, in other places in Latin America that I know of. So they send every week a liturgy to people, and it goes by, not by mail, by someone who delivers it in person to each house, because that's what they have. So we have to recognize that God has given us many gifts, some 5, some 3, some 1, and we do what we can with those gifts. And it could be that we can do Zoom calls, Facebook, YouTube, and website, and all of those together. Perfect. That is beautiful. But it could be that you can just record something and send it to everyone by a text message, and that's welcome too. Again, it doesn't have to stop you, but it feel that the Spirit is also moving in those ways. Regarding the hybrid church, I think yes, we have to understand that this is here to stay. And now that I think about this, imagine deciding to, in a church, that you're going to build your church in the second floor because it's better. And now you have to ask yourself, so what we're going to do with the people who cannot go up the stairs? What are we going to provide to them so they can go upstairs to the second floor? The same thing now is the problem we have if we decide to stop doing online worship and say, so what are we going to do with those who are bedridden and cannot come to church? What are we going to do with those who are traveling and would like to continue to participate in worship but cannot do it? Or those who, for some reason, have worked that Sunday and would love to be part of the community and would love to see that worship service. So we have to think about those people who have challenges and who are not able to go every Sunday to church, or who are still scared of this virus, even when people say it's safe to go back to normal, and they don't want it or don't feel safe to do it. What are we going to provide to them as a church so they can continue to be fed?
Thanks, Edwin. And it's a helpful reminder, I think, to remember that each congregation is called to a specific type of ministry for the community to whom God has called them, right? And that not everybody has to be all things to all people, but that there is a particular call that's in place, not just on pastors, but on congregations themselves, right? For the communities to which they're called. And a helpful reminder from David that not everybody's going to have to, is going to be called to the hybrid forms, that there's some folks who will be called to hybrid forms, online forms, in-person forms, right? And that diversity really is a beautiful thing. The other thing that you mentioned, though, Edwin, you were sort of talking about talents, and some have 5 and some have 3 and some have 1. And I think it's really common for us in our society to sort of still judge the 5 as being good and 1 as being bad, but that's not it, right? It's really about, in God's economy, whatever talents we have, as long as we are using it fully, that's what's good and faithful, not that we have 5 or that we have 1, right? And so even in the context of thinking about worship in this way, that those are really important points to remember. I love that illustration that you were giving about that Bible story as well. So we're sort of turning the corner, and we have just a little bit more time before we need to wrap up so that the Presbytery meeting can be set up and begin on time, but we still have about 9 minutes of our time. And so one of the things that I do want to ask you all to respond to is some thoughts about what contributes to vital worship, whether that's online or in person or in the hybrid world. What are some key things that folks could be thinking about, or some questions that folks could be asking about? Edwin, why don't we start with you on this one?
I think we need to recognize that the need to think outside the box, and it is important in this sense, to welcome the opportunity to attract more people to new ways. One of the things that has been interesting for me, I follow on Facebook my church. I see the statistics, who are logging in, and it's the same people that every Sunday. So I ask myself, so before it was the walls, now what is it that is limiting us to reach out to more people, to be able to attract other people? So that's a question that we have to ask ourselves during this time. How we continue to be a church that evangelizes, that reaches out, that spread the gospel around to others. And similar to what Molly was saying, to maybe people who are different from us, who are, I'm sad I come from a church that is white. I think my wife and I, and maybe two other people, are the only ones people of color. And on Facebook, online every Sunday, the same people connect, the same people who are. So it wasn't the building that was limiting us. It's something else, and we need to ask ourselves, what is that? So we need to take this opportunity, maybe to reach out and use other tools. We can invite new people who are maybe not from our church, or who are not 10 minutes from us, or maybe in another country, and we can invite them to participate in worship with us and learn on other experiences of worship. We can take this opportunity to reach out to meet members of the church who can participate, who didn't participate in worship because they didn't like to stand up in front of people, but they might record themselves reading the Bible or doing a prayer, and we can use it and post it on the internet. We can invite people. I think this is a wonderful moment for all those young people in the church who love to have their cell phones on hand and know what is WhatsApp, what is Instagram, what is YouTube, all those platforms that I have to recognize. I'm lost with half of them. Every week, there's a new platform for youth, and I feel more older every day than before, because I'm like, I thought I was in. No, I'm really out, because I don't know many of those new platforms, but they do. And those are the ways to reach out to the youth and to reach out to other generations. But we have to understand that is not the way that we usually do it. An hour and a half worship is, if you go to any of the platforms right now, videos that are longer than 2 minutes are boring. And that's difficult for a church that has to do a worship for an hour and a half. How we reach out to generations that have a 2-minute lack of attention, and how we reach out to other people who are expecting something different in this moment. So it's a time to try new things as a church, and to understand that, like David was mentioning, there's not just one option. There's many options, and maybe not everyone is going to follow you, and maybe not everyone is going to think, oh, this is what I want. But it's the same as it happened before. Some people go to your church and will visit one and say, this is not my place, and we'll go to another church. They will find, God will provide to them, and in many cases it will be through you. So embrace those moments.
David.
Edwin and Molly have both offered so many good things. One other one that I would add, a quality of vital online worship, would be collaboration, and inviting people in to participate in whatever way that they are equipped and ready to do that. So a parable, I guess, to kind of illustrate this. A few years ago at the church where I worship, we were thinking about starting a new service, the Easter Vigil. And we thought, well, we could prepare this wonderful service, but what if nobody shows up? And one of our leaders with some more experience said, well, here's what you do. You invite the youth to do this reading, and you invite this family to come and present one of the songs, and you start inviting all kinds of different people in the congregation to participate in all kinds of different ways, and suddenly you've got 100 people there. And I think the same, you could make a similar observation about vital online worship. It's going to be vital if we invite the people of God to come and contribute their gifts. That's the best answer I know.
Thanks, David. Molly, your thoughts on that?
I simply want to underline a few things that David and Edwin have already said. Multiple voices. So for me, what contributes to vital worship is really the multiplicity. The energy that comes from very different perspectives joining in the common function work of telling the truth about ourselves in front of God and one another, right? And so truth-telling is one of the signifiers for me of whether a community is vital. And part of that, and I would love to, Edwin, I just really enjoyed how you said the building was not our limit, the walls were not the limit. And that's so true. And we've often ended our conversation about the physical accessibility of a space. And so what most of us are learning is that that was not the main obstacle. And so I wonder, leaning into Calvin a little bit, self-understanding being the kind of portal to understanding of God and vice versa. Some of the truth-telling that could help hold the vitality of any space is to better understand what invisible limits a community is accepting and why. And think about and really get serious. Sometimes those analytics, those online analytics, are a way to kind of capture that, or the prayers of the people and where those prayers are coming from and what concerns are being raised, for public and for pastor alone. But just thinking about how do we understand ourselves in our imagination, and how is it different than the lived reality of us being in community? And how do we tell the truth about that? But also not get into a competition, right? Jihyun said, 1, 3, and 5, there is vital ministry in all of those settings, and none are better or worse than the others. I want to underline that 1,000%. But I think for me, the vitality is around the quality of truth-telling, the deep being real, and the kind of holding space for multiplicity in ourselves, having compassion for ourselves as a people and as individuals, and then also, as Edwin kind of said, evangelism. Where is this invitation? How is this invitation? And thinking through, every community is not for everyone, right? And part of the blessed provision that God has made for human community is that there is a place for everyone, right? Edwin said this earlier. Just because we're not the place does not mean that there's not a place for the individual who doesn't see themselves as relating with us. But that doesn't change the responsibility of truth-telling and kind of looking. So, vitality for me, that's one of those marks that is critical for me.
Yeah. Thanks, Molly. And David, I feel like you're bringing up a perfect sort of ending, right, for us to consider that really vitality in worship is not really just our work, but it's really the work of God through the Holy Spirit, in God, the Holy Spirit, working within and through us, and on us, right? In some ways, of reforming our understanding of what it means to be in worship, and inviting others to really telling the good news of who Jesus Christ is, and to invite folks into that good news. And also inviting folks into a sense of awe and mystery about who God is in the world, and how do we really do that? And how do we also then, as RJ I think is sort of pointing out, how do we actually keep up our energy in order to do that, and our creativity, and an intelligence and love for the work that we've been called to, and for the community to which we've been called? All of those really, really important questions. So this hopefully this panel was not necessarily meant to be a series of answers, but a lot of good question asking and raising, and points to ponder. I'm noticing the time and know that we have to wrap up. Friends in Chicago Presbytery, so good to be with you all, and thank you for your participation and engagement in this pre-Presbyterian meeting time, and getting yourselves up especially early to actually be with us in this time. Thank you for your thoughts and your wisdom that you've brought, and thanks panelists for your wisdom as well.
Indeed. Thank you all so very much. I am deeply indebted to all four of you for joining us this morning. I hope that everybody got at least something out of this discussion. I think there were a lot of terrific points. I just wanted to sum up with one thing. Matt Bloom wrote a book called Flourishing in Ministry, and he uses the illustrations of onstage, backstage, and offstage. And I encourage all of you who are on stage, who feel like you are on stage 24/7, to find some folks on the backstage who can be your support systems. And for those of you who all feel like you're on stage 24/7, please, please, please find some time to be off stage. It is incredibly important for your own vitality, your own health, and your own ministries, and for the ministries of those you serve. And with that, again, my thanks to our panelists, and I again, truly appreciate it.